In this lesson, I'm going to cover EC2 user data and metadata. So what are these two things? Instance metadata is data about your instance. It's available under this path. We've got 169.254, 169.254/latest/metadata. And you can see it's an HTTP URL. So for example, if I use the curl utility to access that path, it returns some of the available information, like the AMI ID, hostname, and so on. So I can then go a little bit further and run this curl command, which goes to /latest/metadata/local IPv4, and you can see here this is the IPv4 address. Okay, it's before the prompt, by the way. So the way that the curl utility returns the information is before the prompt. So you've got to look back here for it. Okay, I've highlighted it in red. In another example here, I'm looking for the public IPv4. So again, at the beginning here, before the prompt, I have the public address returned to me. Now, there's two different versions of the instance metadata service, V1 and V2. V1 is older and less secure. V2 is newer, more secure, and requires a session token for authorization. The examples I just showed you were with IMDS V1. I didn't have to authenticate. I just ran the curl command and it returned the information. Now, when you launch an EC2 instance, you can specify whether you want to enable V1 or only V2. The default with the latest AMI at the time of recording this video is that it defaults to V2, so you won't be able to run those curl commands. So the default launch settings may disable IMDS V1. It's not a bad thing, it's for security, so we do want to leave those defaults for most purposes. We just need to specify a token. This is what it looks like when you're in the launch wizard and you've gone down to enable advanced settings for EC2. You'll see the option metadata accessible. You can turn that off completely if you want to. And then we have the version here, so V2 only, token required. Okay, so you have to include a session token in all instance metadata requests. Next up, we have user data. So user data is the ability to run code when the instance starts for the first time. It's basically like running a script. We can define the script in the user data field here, or we can supply it at the command line interface, and the code is going to run. We can also use batch and PowerShell scripts on Windows as well. So if you're launching Windows instances, you can still run user data. The example here is some code that's going to run on a Linux instance to update patches and then install and start a web server. So in this case, we end up with an EC2 instance running a web server. So that's using the management console. As I mentioned, you can also do it via the CLI. So here the user data is supplied by specifying the file in the CLI command, and this would be the script file or the contents of the script file, which we're then going to execute as the instance launches. So a little bit more information about user data. It must be base 64 encoded. This happens automatically when you're using the console and the CLI. User data is limited to 16 kilobytes in raw form before it's base 64 encoded. Now, user data only runs the first time you launch your instance. You can view the user data in the console. You can even stop your instance and edit the user data, but it still only runs the first time you launch your instance. So just bear that in mind. So user data is a way to run scripts when we start our instances the first time. Metadata is the way that we can retrieve specific information about the instance itself. And we can combine these two, and we'll see that when we do hands-on practice with user data and metadata. Okay, so the best way to learn is to get hands-on. So let's play around with some user data and metadata on EC2. So you want to be logged into the console. You also want to open up this markdown file. You will find it in the course download in the Amazon EC2 directory, and it's called userdata metadata.md. Okay, so what we need to do first is go and launch instances. I'm going to launch two instances. I'm going to show you how to configure one that allows IMDS version 1 and the other one which is going to have the default setting which does not allow IMDS v1. So we have to use token-based authentication. So let's see what all this means. Let's head over to EC2. In EC2, I'm going to launch a couple of instances. For the first one, I'm going to give it a name so I can identify it easily, IMDS v1. And I'm going to leave the default Linux 2023 AMI or whatever the latest is for the Linux AMI from Amazon. T2 micro. I don't need a key pair. And I want to make sure that I have a security group that allows port 22 and port 80. Okay, port 22 for remote secure shell, port 80 because we're going to run a web server a bit later on in the exercise. I have one called web access. We'll check the port rules on that in a moment. At the very bottom of the page here, expand advanced details. We're going to scroll right the way down until we see the metadata here. So we see metadata accessible. I do want to have it enabled, but the default is v2 only, token required. So for v2 requests, you must include the session token to all instance metadata requests. Now I'm going to just flick it back so that I allow v1 and v2, and then the token is optional. And then I'm simply going to launch this instance. I'll then do the same thing, but I'm going to launch one with the default settings, which will have v2 only. So IMDS v2 as a label. Same again, proceed to add a key pair, use a security group, and then that's it this time. I'm not changing anything. It's going to require token-based authentication, so I can just launch that instance. Coming back up, let's just check our instances. I'm going to go across to the security tab here, and I can see my role. It's got a bunch of different ports from various testing I've been doing, but most importantly, it's got port 80 from any source and port 22 from any source. So this is going to work for this lab. So you just want to give it a minute or two just to make sure the instance is up and running, and then we're going to connect using Instance Connect. So hopefully my first instance is ready to accept connections. I've selected it. Let's click on Connect. We're going to use the EC2 Instance Connect here. Click on Connect again. I've got EC2 User as the username. And here we are. I'm on the console through Secure Shell. So this is the first instance I launched, which will allow us to run these commands without the authentication token. So here are the commands. I'm going to run the first one. So it's a curl command. So curl is basically a utility for making HTTP connections. And then the 169.254.169.254 local address for the metadata service. This one is going to retrieve the instance ID. So let's just pop that into the command line here. Now the actual result is over here on the left hand side before the prompt. So we can see the instance ID is returned. When I hit enter again, it just comes back to a normal prompt. I can do the same for AMI ID. Let's copy this one, paste that in, and my AMI ID gets returned in the left-hand side here. So this is a very useful way of retrieving this information from our instance. Now you don't have to use the exact commands that I've shown you. If you backspace back to metadata with a slash on the end, it's going to return all of these different options. So for example, I could now add in, we've got one here that says placement. So I'll type in placement slash, press enter, and we can see it's returned the options under placement like availability zone. Let's put in availability zone, availability dash zone. Make sure you put a slash on the end, press enter, and right at the bottom of my screen here is US East 1C. So it's retrieved the availability zone of the instance. So again, could be very useful information for us. So that's my instance that allows IMDS version 1. Let's now connect to the other instance, the IMDS v2 only instance with the default settings that will not allow us to use these commands without an authentication token. So here we are, I'm on the instance. Let's come back and I'm just going to copy one of these commands again. Maybe I'll try and get the instance type. Put this in, press enter, and I get this message back. So it's telling me essentially unauthorized. We're not able to do that. All right, let's clear the screen. What do we need to do instead? What we need to do is firstly create a session and get a token. So that's this command here. Essentially we're configuring an environment variable. The environment variable will be token, and the result of this command, which is going to create a session and retrieve an authentication token, is going to be stored as the environment variable. So we need to copy that entire line, copy that to my clipboard. I'll come back, I'll put it in, press enter, and that's actually achieved what I wanted it to. If I, for example, go echo $token, we can actually see the token that's been returned. It's being stored as this environment variable token. So now we have the token, let's use it in a command. What I'm going to do is run this command to get the instance ID. It's very much like the one we ran earlier on. We got this curl command in here to retrieve the instance metadata information. Except what we're going to do here is we have the -h and we're supplying the authentication token here. So X AWS EC2 metadata token is going to correspond to the token that we have stored in this environment variable. So I can copy this entire command, and let's try and run this one. And it works. I get the instance ID right here. So we've done the authentication. Now we can actually retrieve the information more securely than we did before. And you can do the same, of course, with the AMI ID here as well. So that's instance metadata. Lots of information about our instance. What about user data? So user data is essentially like running a script when the instance starts for the first time and only for the first time. And what we can do is we can leverage metadata within user data. So here we have a script. This is a bash script. And with our user data, we always start with this, the shebang, ! /bin/bash. That's the path to the interpreter, the bash interpreter that's going to run the commands for us. So that's normal to have that there. After that, these items in green are just comments in the script. And then these are the actual commands themselves. So here we're going to run a yum update. So we're going to update the latest patches. We're going to install the Apache web service, HTTPD. We're going to start and enable the web service so it starts on boot. Then we're utilizing metadata. So what's going to happen with this script, it's going to install a web server and it's going to create a custom page. And that custom page will include some information that's specific to that EC2 instance, because it's going to be using metadata to retrieve the instance ID, the AMI ID, and the instance type, and output that information onto the web page. Now, we can run this as user data, but I'll just show you can run this as a script directly on the instance as well. So I'm going to copy all of this information that's between this enclosing bash with the three tick marks at the end and at the beginning. So just copy all of that information. We'll come back to the instance that's running with IMDS v2. I'm going to clear. I'm going to use nano to create a script, and I'll just unimaginatively call it script.sh. And then let's save that. I need to make it executable, so I run chmod +x script. And that should now have the permissions we need. Okay, so it's now an executable script. So what I need to do now is I'm going to run it as sudo. So I run sudo./script. And that's going to actually go ahead. You can see it's trying to install any updates that are missing on this particular AMI. It's going to install the Apache web service, and then it's going to create that custom web page with the metadata on it. Now that's finished. So let's come back to instances here. I'll select my IMDS v2 instance, copy the public IP, and let's paste this in, and let's see. And now we get this custom web page, and it shows us the instance ID, the AMI ID, and the instance type. So I just ran that directly on the instance as a script. User data is basically doing the same thing. What we're going to do now is I'm going to click on Launch Instances and just give this a label, User Data Test. Again, I'm going to leave mostly defaults, don't need a key pair, do need a security group with port 80 open, so I'll choose my web access. And now under advanced details, just go all the way to the bottom, and we're going to paste our user data in here. Okay, so we have this box, user data, optional. So I'm going to come back, copy the exact same script, paste it exactly as it is in here, and then click Launch Instance. And this is going to have exactly the same effect. It's going to run through the script as the instance launches. Again, this only happens the first time the instance is run. Now, if I select the instance, you can actually come over to Instance Settings, Edit User Data. Okay, but don't be fooled. You can't actually edit it in here while the instance is live. You can stop it and edit it, but it won't run. Okay, but it's useful sometimes because you can view the information. So you want to check what was the user data I ran on this particular instance. So you can come in here and see it. Okay, so I've given it a minute. It might take a bit longer. Give this at least a minute or two just to boot up, because it does have to run that script as well. It's not a very complex script, but it needs a little bit of time to boot. So I'm going to see if mine is ready. Let's use the public IP address, and it is. There we go. So we can see the instance ID, the AMI ID, and the instance type. So that is using metadata and user data together. Now I've finished with my instances, so I'm simply going to come back and terminate all three instances.